to PCC Cascade. Thank you so much. She's coming? Oh, good. Thank you so much for coming here this evening. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and participate in what we hope will be a lively community dialogue. The program this evening is called The New Jim Cro, Race, Policing, and Social Control in Portland. And there was a group of us over the summer in May or June, we decided we're going to read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Cro, Color Blindness in the Age of Mass Incarceration. And we said, well, we're going to read this book, and, you know, we were just going to read the book. So we would come together on Saturday mornings, we would spend an hour and a half together, we would discuss the chapter that we just read. It's a pretty short book, right? It's not one of those books that gives you a headache, right? It's a pretty short book. But after we read this book, we felt like we had to do something. You could not read the information in this book and not be compelled to act. So just by a show of hands, how many people have read this book? Hands up high. Good. Excellent. 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 And since I have the mic, like I need one, right? I want you to know that Michelle Alexander will be in Portland on January 16th, and she's going to be at Mount Olivet Church. PCC Cascade is hosting her, and there will be some information for the community to find out how the community can get tickets, because we want to make sure that the community has access to hear about Michelle when she comes. So, excuse me, is Vicki out there? No. Okay. And so when we read this book, we said, oh my gosh, we've got to do something. And the reason we said that is because there's really no new information in this book. There's nothing in this book that shocked or surprised us. But the fact that she did such an incredible job of putting all the pieces together, it gave all of us who were in the book club an aha moment. We were like, oh, so the mass incarceration really isn't happening by accident. Oh, federal policies are actually assisting and helping to incarcerate large numbers of African American and Latino populations. Oh, that's right. The fact that there are no jobs, that there's no education opportunities in communities, set some communities up to fill up our jails, our prisons, etc. And so what the book did for us was to motivate us to share this information with other people and then work with the community to figure out what is it that we need to do here. We have an incredible panel tonight that's going to share with you some information. And what I realized, and if I seem a little bit discombobulated, I was not going to MC this program. And guess what? I am. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to just jump into our presentations, and then we're going to open it up. When our last speaker talks, what we want to do is create a space for young people in the audience to share some experiences that they may have had, if they feel comfortable doing that. So we're going to create a space first for young people, and then after they've had an opportunity to speak, we'll open it up for the full audience. And so know that we will not be talking heads to you all night, just for the first portion of the program, and then we want to engage you in the dialogue. Does that sound like a good way to spend a couple of hours? Thank you so much for being here. And so, I guess I will start off with, And so what I'm going to do is have each speaker briefly introduce themselves before they share their portion of the program. And I can tell you, and let me just briefly now say, by the way, I am Ann Hardesty, and I've been working on police accountability in this community for longer than I care to admit. But let's just say definitely well over a decade. And so tonight I'm going to share with you what has come out of the Department of Justice investigation, what the plans are for the settlement agreement, and what life is like in Northeast Portland if you're a young African American person. And so that will be my portion of the program. Right to my left is Anoop, and he is a professor, and he's going to introduce himself and tell you what he's going to talk about this evening. Next to Anoop is Dan Handleman with Copwatch, and he's going to talk about Know Your Rights, so that when you leave this room tonight, everyone will know what their rights are if they are stopped by a police officer. And then next to him, and your name just went out of my head, Andy.
That's right.
Andy is a teacher at Jefferson High School. He's been there for over 13 years, and he's going to share some of the experiences his students had and some of his observations as a longtime instructor at Jefferson High School. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Anoop. And Anoop, I don't know if you're more comfortable sitting there. I have a voice that projects, but if you don't, then you may want to stand up here so that you can actually talk. But it's up to you. You're a professional at this, so I'll let you do what you want.
All right, hey everyone, how you guys doing?
All right.
All right.
Can you hear him in the back?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my name is Anoop, Mirpuri, and I teach African American literature at Portland State, and I'm fairly new to Portland. I've just been here for a few months, so I'm hoping to kind of be here and see what people on the ground here in Portland are doing and how we're engaging this question of policing and mass incarceration. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of get into what I'm going to say, and things will become apparent, but I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and I'm happy to kind of open things up and take questions afterwards and learn from all of you. But I want to talk about the difference between today and 40 years ago for a few minutes. So I want to look back to the morning of September 13th, 1971. Some of you, I'm sure, were alive back then. Many of you weren't. I certainly wasn't. Although sometimes I feel like I was. On that morning, September 13th, 1971, Americans woke up to a world that would have seemed oddly similar to the one that we face today, weirdly enough. Right? So economic recession, high unemployment, a crisis of the global financial system, white resentment over the government's supposed tendency to favor the concerns of minorities, and anxieties over the decline of American global dominance. But perhaps the strangest similarity between now and then is one that's almost never publicly acknowledged. Difficult as it is to imagine now, given that the U.S. has since become the world's greatest incarcerator, the early 1970s saw a growing number of people seriously questioning the sustainability, the effectiveness, and the legitimacy of American prisons. By 1973, a federal task force concluded that, quote, the prison, the reformatory, and the jail have achieved a shocking record of failure. There is overwhelming evidence that these institutions create crime rather than prevent it. This is a federal task force. Right? Now, of course, this task force somehow assumed that the purpose of the prison is actually to eliminate crime rather than to discipline and regulate the working classes. Right? That's another argument that we're going to make. But despite this somewhat, perhaps some people might say, faulty assumption, there was a growing consensus among a wide spectrum of the population that if they were not already, prisons would soon become obsolete, and that we should begin the process of dismantling them. So most of us know that at that point, maybe some of you don't know, but at that point, mid-1970s, there were 350,000 people incarcerated in the U.S., and that number had stayed flat for over 40 years. And today, 40 years later, we have upwards of 2.5 million people locked in cages. 350,000 to 2.5 million. So the question is, what happened? Now, the story, of course, is a complex one, and it's been told in many ways by a number of different people. Michelle Alexander certainly tells a very, very compelling story that explains a whole lot, right? I mean, what does it mean to think of mass incarceration as the new Jim Cro? In an age where we finally have all achieved equal protection and full equality, the implications are astounding if you think about it. Right? I'm not going to tell that story tonight because there's people that would probably tell it much better than I am. But what I am going to do is, I don't think that any explanation of U.S. prison growth would really be complete without considering the groups of people that actually pose the question of the prison's legitimacy in the first place. So on that morning that I'm talking about, September 13, 1971, state troopers stormed the Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York and opened fire, killing 43 people, all prisoners. How many of you guys know about the story of Attica? Okay, So I'm going to kind of go through a little bit about it to refresh your memory and maybe to tell people that don't already know. So the attack was a militarized police response to the takeover of the facility by prisoners. Disillusioned by the promises of reform, under pressure from hostile guards, and seething at the everyday violence that was prison life, and that still is prison life, prisoners revolted and for a brief period demanded the attention of the entire nation. So over 1,200 of Attica's 2,200 inmates occupied one of the 4 prison yards. They took hostages, and they organized a leadership cadre and a security force. Almost immediately, they began to call for meaningful action on a list of grievances and demands that were drafted by the self-proclaimed Attica Liberation Faction. So during the next 4 days, a group of community leaders, attorneys, legal scholars, and journalists were called in to arbitrate the standoff between prisoners and the administration. So after an impasse, during which the prisoners were given an ultimatum to surrender unconditionally, New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller halted negotiations and gave the green light for law enforcement to retake the prison using deadly force. So Attica's historical significance is partly due to the fact that it remains the most massive prison rebellion in U.S. history. But Attica has proven to be much more powerful than that, and I'll explain why. And ironically, this might explain why so few of us outside this room actually know its history. The McKay Commission, which was appointed by Governor Rockefeller to investigate the rebellion and the massacre, described it this way, and I'll quote, "With the exception of the Indian massacres in the late 19th century, the state police assault, which ended the prison uprising, was the bloodiest one-day encounter between Americans since the Civil War." End quote. So it's telling, I think, that the Commission evoked America's genocidal wars against the indigenous as a precedent for the Attica massacre. In doing so, perhaps without even knowing, the Commission placed Attica within the long history of American efforts to manage groups that have been understood as undeserving of rights. In other words, the McKay Commission implicitly agreed with the very claims already being made by the Attica rebels, that prisoners, like slaves and Indians, have been cast outside civil society and were thus vulnerable to deadly violence that would inevitably go unpunished. In 1971, this was the argument that posed the challenge to prison legitimacy, and it was the Attica prisoners that forced state officials to begin asking this question. So to counter this crisis of legitimacy, conservatives took on the task of reinterpreting the legacy of the Attica revolt, not to mention the entire prison movement and the radical political activism of people of color in the early 1970s. This was a major legal, political, and cultural effort to criminalize social justice activism and resistance. So the transfer of political and economic struggles to the terrain of law and order not only helped reconstitute the legitimacy of the prison, the police response to urban unrest and to struggles for equality laid the groundwork for the rise of mass incarceration, not to mention the rise of conservative dominance in American politics and the ensuing rightward shift of the Democratic Party. And this is also central to Michelle Alexander's argument in the Jim Cro. So the point that I'm trying to make is that it was coalitions among activists and prisoners that helped engender this crisis of legitimacy surrounding the prison. And more importantly, this crisis could just as easily have led to the gradual dismantling of the prison rather than the exponential growth of prisons. In other words, the outcome of the crisis was not decided in advance. What led it one way rather than the other way was the powerful appeal of the centuries-long association of blackness with crime, which we're all familiar with. But the question for me is, what if the white working and middle classes, to whom this racist appeal was so strong, what if they were actually able to recognize that their own subordinate position in American society was due to the power of racism to divide the class and forestall the very possibility of solidarity in a wider struggle for economic justice? So I want to suggest that today we're beginning to see a very similar convergence of crisis and opportunity. Over the last few years, there's been increased scrutiny directed toward the prison and the criminal justice system across the political spectrum. I think it's safe to say that mass incarceration has again, for the first time in 40 years really, become a glaring crisis in American life. To the point that even the conservative U.S. Supreme Court has ordered California to release thousands of prisoners with the rationale that prison conditions violate the Eighth Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. More than that, you have free market think tanks like the Cato Institute and the Manhattan Institute devoting a great deal of time, energy, and resources to asking the same questions we're trying to ask today, which is why does America lock up so many people and how do we solve this crisis? Now, it might seem disingenuous that the very organizations that have long promoted government policies that have led to mass incarceration are now claiming to want to help to solve the problem. But even if we don't agree with the solutions, and we shouldn't agree with the solutions, these are still really important developments in a broader struggle. Now, lots of people argue that this new concern over prison growth is simply economic, that it's the result of state budget crises. While I don't want to disclaim the role that the recession is playing in the upsurge and in kind of criticism of criminal justice in prison, I do want to suggest something a little bit different. And I want to suggest that the concerted attention on the prisoner today, from everywhere from liberals to radicals to law and order conservatives, might be better understood as the reemergence of a long historical anxiety over the central role that has been played by captivity within American capitalism. This anxiety among the populace has been generated by the important work of organizations such as the California-based abolitionist group Critical Resistance, the Sentencing Project, Prison Moratorium Project, also the efforts of scholars to contest the claims made by politicians that prison growth was simply a logical response to rising crime rates. And of course, it's been fueled by the actions and claims of prisoners themselves, who from California to Georgia in recent years have demonstrated their resistance to the violence of mass incarceration through a series of labor and hunger strikes. So in other words, what I really want to say is that this is, or at least can be, really a momentous time. And opportunities are emerging for re-envisioning and reconstructing a more just world. One that doesn't rely on the criminalization of youth of color, the caging of millions of people, and the policing of our everyday movements. But a critical step to take advantage of these opportunities, I think, is to recognize that none of it had to be this way in the first place. This is the lesson that we learned from the generations that came before us. I think we need to resist falling into the trap of believing that young black and brown men have been doomed from the start. The one criticism that I have of Michelle Alexander's otherwise brilliant book is that by calling it the new Jim Cro, in calling it the new Jim Cro, she accidentally gives the impression that mass incarceration was somehow inevitable. From my view, recognizing that it was never inevitable, but rather a series of responses to historically specific political and economic conditions, this recognition is the first step in reconstructing the world that we want to live in, and moving towards what Angela Davis calls abolition democracy. As long as we continue to think that we're doomed, and we always were doomed from the start, we'll only continue to confirm what the conservative elements of American society already believe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anoop. So now it's my turn. And I'm using a stopwatch just to make sure that I'm a good co-facilitator and don't go over. And I'm going to stand because I tend to use my arms and I don't want to hit a note while I'm swinging my arms around. Again, I want to thank you for being here. And I want to start with, I am a member of the AMA Coalition for Justice and Police Reform. And you may have heard of us. How many people have heard of that organization? So a few of you have heard of us. So it's a community-based, faith-based led coalition that has been working on police accountability for this time for at least over 2.5 years. But we've been together before, we went away, then we came back together after the death of Aaron Campbell, which was in January of 2010. And so the AMA Coalition, in July of 2011, asked the Department of Justice to come to Portland and investigate Portland police officers for patterns and practices of behavior, especially as it related to people of color. And so you might be surprised to know that the Department of Justice did in fact come to town. Oh wait, let me back up a little bit. When you hear the public response, you hear the mayor say, I called for the DOJ to come to town. You hear Commissioner Dan Saltzman say, I called for the Department of Justice to come to town. Neither of those particular politicians were calling for the Department of Justice before the community decided that they had had enough. And they were going to call the federal government to come in and check out our police force. So the DOJ, the Department of Justice investigation, we called them in July, they came. The Department of Justice completed their investigation in September, on September 12th to be exact. They came to town, they had a big press conference, the mayor was there, the police chief was there, and it was a love fest. If you saw any of the media coverage, you might be shocked at what I'm about to tell you. Because if you saw the media coverage was basically, it's not Portland police, it's a broken mental health system. And so I want to read you a direct section out of the investigation. In August of 2010, 3 officers responded to a complaint about a person screaming inside their apartment. The officers obtained a key from the front desk and entered the apartment after announcing their entry. They encountered an unarmed, naked man laying on the floor of his apartment, screaming for help. The person leaped up when he saw the officers and ran towards them. The officer immediately, without warning, deployed his taser at the subject's chest. The subject fell to the ground, but when he attempted to get back up, the officer deployed his taser for 3 additional 5-second cycles. It turned out the suspect was a diabetic experiencing a medical emergency. So, the Department of Justice says that is a violation of that gentleman's 4th Amendment rights, and that there was no way that he should have had that kind of treatment at the hands of Portland police. They listed, in fact, in the investigation, at least 4 examples of really egregious behavior by Portland police officers. And so, in their investigation, they did in fact find that Portland police officers do use excessive force in some occasions, especially when they're dealing with people who they think have mental health issues or they are perceived to have mental health issues. And so the Department of Justice said, we're going to hold you accountable for that. We're going to come up with recommendations to make sure that the police department understands that they have to respect the constitutional rights of the people that they are sworn to protect and serve. And so they gave a statement of intent. They said that they were going to change the use of force in Portland Police Bureau. They were going to create a crisis intervention system. They said they were going to require an early intervention system to be able to track Portland police officers who had a lot of complaints or who were acting inappropriately. They wanted a system whereby they could track those complaints, with the vision being that they would correct that behavior. They said that they would improve our misconduct investigations. In fact, the Department of Justice called our accountability system a self-defeating accountability system. And I want to hold you up a visual because a picture is worth 1,000 words many times. And I know you won't be able to see anything on this, but this is a 2-year process for a community person who feels they've been wronged by the police, and this is just the internal process. And if you see this, if you can barely see this, what you see is all these little dots. All these little dots are venues that people have to go through in order to get their cases heard. And now it could take up to 2 years for someone to have their case go through the entire process. So I told you what they found. I told you that they affirmed that in fact there is constitutional violations. And now I want to tell you what the solution is. Sadly, for the last 2 weeks, Dan Handleman and myself and a whole bunch of other people have been going to City Hall testifying, saying that the investigation does not match up with the settlement agreement. So if you look at the report, what you find is that we do not discipline Portland police officers for bad behavior. In fact, the investigation found that subordinates were signing off on their supervisors' use of force within the Bureau, that they barely completed after-action reports that are supposed to say this is what happened, and this was the series of events. And of course, they rarely, if ever, investigate at the scene of a crime. If someone's injured, their job is to make sure that the injured person gets medical care, and to make sure that they talk to all the witnesses that are there. And Portland police officers just have not been willing to do that over a long period of time. So the settlement agreement, you're going to love this. The settlement agreement calls for a $26 million investment over the next 5 years. You might be surprised to know that 26 new police officers would be added to Portland Police Bureau for that process. And so it is the Department of Justice and the City Council so far opinion that if you want to fix what's broke with the police department, you put 26 new people into the Portland Police Bureau. You create an addictions and behavioral health unit within the Portland Police Bureau. You increase the staff in the professional standards by 10 people. You add 5 new training officers. You add 2 new people to the chief's office at a total cost of $3.241, which is $3.2 million for the first year. And then it will be $2.8 million each year for the next 5 years after that. And then, remember the self-defeating accountability system I told you about? We're going to fix that by giving them more staff people. We're going to give them 2 more staff people at a cost of $237,818 with the assumption that if we just give them more people, our self-defeating system will work. And of course, they're going to add a city attorney. They're going to add 3 people to the IPR, which is the broken accountability system that we have. And so I'm telling you this to say what we're going to do is invest $5.8 million in the first year and $5.4 million every year thereafter for the next 5 years. When I spoke at the City Council today, I said, for me, there are 3 questions. At the end of the day, at the end of the $26 million investment, will bad Portland police officers be able to be fired? That's question number 1 for me. Will the culture within the Portland Police Bureau have changed sufficiently that the public feels comfortable with that? 3, if a family is making a decision to call 911, are they going to think that you're going to come to help, or are they going to be worried that you're going to kill somebody that you're coming to do a welfare check on? So when I said to the City Council today, you're sitting here ready to vote for $26 million, can you answer yes to those 3 questions? And they can't, because there's nothing in the settlement agreement that addresses those 3 issues. So again, in my perspective, in my view, we have a City Council that has been unwilling to hold the police accountable. Now we have the Department of Justice who say that they're going to provide oversight, but the settlement agreement is so weak and pretty much puts the reform in the hands of the police. I think that that's not acceptable. I think we need a totally independent police review process. I think we need to remove oversight from the police department. And so I'm going to continue to work to try to make that happen. But I'm going to end my presentation with a story. In the summer, somebody told me that there were 300 people arrested on Killingsworth. No, in fact, the police told me that. I knew it was somebody told me that. The police told me that. And so, as someone who always asks questions, I'm like, that seems kind of excessive. So I found out that there was this new community police action that was focused on cleaning up Killingsworth. And the way the officer described it to me was the broken glass syndrome. You know? And the broken glass syndrome is, the assumption is if there's a broken glass in a community, then the broken glass gives people permission to commit more crime, right? Because people see the broken glass and say, well, you didn't fix that, so that means I can go rob a bank, right? At least that's the police theory. That's what they, you know, that's their theory. And so, of course, you know, I said, well, who are those 300 people? Who are the people that were arrested, right? It's like, because that's a lot of people. You would think that's a lot of people. That should have been front page news, right? Well, it wasn't. It didn't make the newspaper. And you may wonder why it didn't make the newspaper. So I asked, and in fact, the AMA Coalition meets with the police chief and the mayor on a quarterly basis. So started asking at those meetings, well, can I find out who the people were that were arrested? And first they were like, oh, you know, oh, it's just going to be so much work for us to figure that out. Well, I need to know as a community person, I want to know. And so their first response to me was that it was going to cost $2,800 for them to give me the answer to that question, because they would need to have 2 full-time law enforcement people going through the data to count what happened. I said, well, you have 3 police officers assigned to this unit. Don't they know who they arrested? I mean, it can't be that complicated. And quite frankly, I would volunteer to go through the files and find it myself. Well, lo and behold, I was at another meeting with the mayor and the police chief, and they still hadn't given it to me. So I put pressure on the mayor. Mayor, I need this information. And I would think, as the police commissioner, you would want to know as well, right? So he leans over to the police chief and says, give her the information. And so just last week, because they really don't want to give me information, I don't know why, I'm a nice person. It's not that I'm going to do anything bad with the information that they give me. But they did give me some information and had a conversation with me last week. And they told me not to jump to any conclusions about the data that they gave me because, you know, it really hasn't been analyzed yet, right? But, you know, I'm a pretty smart cookie. And when I look at a document like this, now, and I know you can't read it, but I will tell you at the top, it says white. In the middle, it says Native American. It says Hispanic. This says black. And this is Asian, right? And so these are the number of people who had multiple charges, right? Now, and because you can't read this document, I will tell you that the black number here says 180. The Asian number says 7. The Hispanic number says 7. The Native American number says 3. The white number said 31. When I met with this particular officer, he was shocked that 31 white people had been arrested. Let me also share with you, he didn't think that many white people had been arrested. It really freaked him out. He didn't know what had gone wrong with this police action. And so you might wonder, so who are these people? Because I really had a concern. Who are these people? And then I find out the people that they went after are people who have long histories in the community. They may have a drug or alcohol problem. But guess what? If you live in a community for 25 or 30 years, the community protects you and takes care of you. And so people knew these people. So there were people that were open containers on the street. There were some people that were probably smoking weed, you know. And so what they said was alcohol related. And in fact, this whole, almost 50% of the people, it was alcohol related. Now let me ask you this question. What difference would it have made if we'd have taken those people to an alcohol and drug treatment facility? If we'd have taken those people to some alcohol and drug-free housing and taken them to get some counseling? What difference would it have made? So think about how many more jail beds we need. Think about how many more people are going through our criminal justice system. And they're going through it because the city has plans to clean up Killingsworth, right? And we know what that means. And communities of color, what it means is that we're moving out. Other people are moving in. And we don't want anything that's not pretty for those new people that are going to come in and invest those dollars. And so I walk in with saying that it's hard work trying to hold the police accountable. They have a lot more resources than the community does, but we have a responsibility to hold the police accountable. They work for us, and they tend to forget that they're supposedly public servants. And so we have to get them back into being servants of the community and not people who are occupied forces that are trying to control people in our community. Thank you for listening. And then you're going to be next. And we don't have PowerPoint.
We don't have PowerPoint, so I'm going to do the old-fashioned PowerPoint. I'm going to hop down here and hand out some PowerPoint.
All right.
Follow you.
Want me to give you some help?
Around through a whole section, that would be great. My name is Dan Handleman. I'm with Copwatch. I helped found the group back in 1991. So Joanne said she's been doing more than a decade. I've been doing this for 21 years, and I just don't know how to say that. The first incident that helped bring me into police accountability was in September of 1991 when Portland police sprayed pepper spray all over a bunch of protesters outside of a protest against George Bush. And what has happened on November 3rd? We see that a lot of young people got pepper sprayed trying to protest for their rights. And so things, in some ways, things haven't changed. I've been doing this 21 years, and things haven't changed. And these cards that I just handed out, you know what, I'm going to need one back. So I don't have one to lead the... Thank you. If you could just share it. Thank you. So these cards haven't changed very much because our Constitution hasn't been changed, so that's a good thing. A lot of local state ordinances haven't changed, and a lot of local Portland ordinances haven't changed. So what I'm going to do, normally we do this in an hour, so I'm going to try to do this with you in 10 minutes or less, because I already did my introduction. And we used to do a call and response. I'm going to do a little bit of trying to get you involved in this, but I'm going to read the paragraphs myself, and I will ask you some questions, and I'm going to also give you some magic phrases that you need to know. So I'm going to ask you to repeat those magic phrases out loud. And before we get into this, I have some, what we say is very sobering news, I guess it's said in the training video we used in Copwatch, that these are your rights on paper, and this is not necessarily how things work out in the street. Right? So you need to know what your rights are in order to invoke them. But if you try to invoke them, it might end up that you end up on the wrong end of the nightstick where the police said, oh, they failed the attitude test. I actually once said, I don't have to talk to you, and the officer said, oh, you're one of those. Right? Somebody who believes in constitutional rights. All right, so the first paragraph says, when you're stopped, stay calm, keep your hands visible, be careful what you say. If you're not driving, you do not have to carry ID. You don't have to identify yourself, but if you refuse, police may bring you in. You can't be arrested for not having ID. Now, why do you think you want to keep your hands visible when you run into a cop? They want to shoot you because why?
Because you're reaching for a weapon.
They think you're reaching for a weapon. That's correct. All right. So does that surprise you that they can bring you in to identify you? Because this is what happens. That's not true. They can't just walk down the street and you say, oh, I'm not going to identify myself. You're coming with me. If they're trying to give you a ticket, they're trying to arrest you for something, and you don't have your ID, and you want to identify yourself, then how are they going to give you a ticket if they don't know who you are? They bring you in, they fingerprint you, do all this stuff. All right, so the magic phrase for this part, and let me preface this before I tell you the magic phrase, that there's four possible things the officer might be doing when they're talking to you. First is called mere conversation, right? Hey, how you doing? How about that Blazers game? Nice weather. That's just conversation, what it sounds like. The next thing they might be doing is they might be stopping you. They might not be detaining or arresting you, which is the two other levels. They might just be trying to gather some information. Maybe there's a crime in the neighborhood. They want to know if you know anything about it. So it would be a stop where you're not just having your conversation. And then, or they might be detaining you because they thought you jaywalked. They might give you a ticket, or they might be arresting you. We'll talk about arrests a little later. So if you're to determine if you're having a mere conversation or not, the magic phrase you want to tell the police officer is, "Am I free to go?" Can you say that?
Am I free to go?
So you say, "Am I free to go?" If the officer says, "No, you're not free to go," then you have to say, "Well, am I being stopped? Am I being detained? Am I being arrested?" And then hopefully they're going to tell you, and they're going to tell you what you're doing. They're not obligated to tell you exactly why they stopped, which is another misconception that people have. And unfortunately, again, in the best of all worlds, they would be friendly, tell you their name, tell you what they're doing. They're supposed to be being trained that way now, but we don't know that that's happening. And so we can do more on question and answer. But let's get into that. Second paragraph says, if you're driving, you must show your license, registration, and proof of insurance. If you are suspected of drinking and refuse to take a breath test, your license can be suspended. And we have lawyer friends that say, well, your license will be suspended. I guess there are some cases where there's some discretion, but usually that is true. The license, registration, and proof of insurance, those are 3 pieces of paper that you need to have with you when you're driving. And if you don't, in Portland, they can tow your car away for any one of those things. And I don't remember, we usually have a lawyer when we're doing this. And I don't remember which ones are arrestable offenses, but at least they're going to leave you on the side of the road without a car if you don't have one of those pieces of paper. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that paragraph because not everybody drives. And we're going to get on to the next one. And it says, if police want to search you, they can pat you down to check for weapons. Make it clear you do not consent to any further search. If they say they have a search warrant, ask to see it. If they're searching your home or your car with probable cause, make it clear you do not consent to a search. So, here is magic phrase number 2. I do not consent to this search.
I do not consent to this search.
Okay, now why do we say I do not consent to this search instead of just saying no or yes if they ask you if you want to be searched? Because they might say, do you mind if I search you? If they try to twist it around, do you mind if I search you? Yes, I do mind. Oh, they said yes, so I search you, right? So no matter how they ask the question, if you say, I do not consent to this search, right, then that's what you mean. And when we do this training, we say it loud, say it proud. Because if you say it to the officer and it's your word against theirs, then you say it, I don't know, the officer, I didn't hear it, right? But if the person across the street heard it, if your neighbor heard it, if the person that you were walking down the street with heard it, then if you get to court, then you can say, I said I didn't consent to the search, and they can be your witness, right? So say it loud and say it proud. Say it one more time.
I do not consent to this search.
Okay. So the next paragraph is, if you are arrested, the paragraph says, if you are arrested, you do not have to answer any questions other than identifying yourself. Don't offer excuses or explanations. Anything you say can be used against you. Just say, I want to talk to a lawyer. If you don't have a lawyer, ask the police how to contact one. So that's your magic phrase right there. I want to talk to a lawyer.
I want to talk to a lawyer.
Now, what do you hear on TV? The first thing that happens when somebody gets arrested, what's the first thing they say? Right? And then blah, 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 blah. You have to write to an attorney. You don't know how to contact one. We'll get contact one for you. They always hear that what? While they're putting the handcuffs on. Right? That's not what happens in real life. They don't have to give you those, what they're called the Miranda rights after the name of the court case that established those rights. They don't have to give you those rights until you're in a room and you're being interrogated. So that's why we do these trainings, so that you know these rights, right? Because they want you to talk. They want you to start yapping your mouth off and say, oh, I was just hanging out with my friend at the store. I didn't know they didn't pay for that Slurpee. And then, so even though you're saying you didn't do anything, you talked, right? You talked. They're going to use that against you in court of law. That's why they say it. Anything you say will be used against you in court of law. It's true. So don't say anything. Right? It's very hard, and I've been doing this for 21 years. The cop stops me, and I'm like, start talking. But generally speaking, don't talk. And I did say, and I will repeat this, that what I'm advising you and what I'm saying, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV either. You're going to have to gauge the situation you're in, right? And this is particularly true for people who the police are going to be roughing up on a regular basis. You may want to try to assert these rights, but then when they push back, there's going to be a certain point where you're going to have to make a decision about, do I want to be taken down for the attitude adjustment, or do I want to sort of do what I can to keep the officer from getting rough on me and get out of the situation. And if they do violate your rights, then you can complain about it afterwards. You can contact a lawyer and sue about it afterwards. But it may be that they're going to make a choice to start escalating things, even though, again, they're not supposed to under the new training. All right, so next paragraph says, if you're cop watching, be sure to let officers know you don't intend to interfere with the arrest. This means staying 10 feet or more away from the action and not trying to distract the officers or the arrestee's attention. And cop watching isn't something anybody can do. I mean, we do like a 2-hour training on it, but it's just observing what police officers are doing. But we generally tell people not to cop watch alone, because if you're cop watching alone, they're dealing with that person. They go, yeah, you're next, right? So if you got somebody to watch your back, then you're a little bit safer. But I think it's a courtesy to the people in our community. When you see the police hassling them, you might want to stop and watch and make sure that they're okay, and watch the whole thing, get the information that you can, and be their witness. If you're the victim of police misconduct, you want to be sure to get the names of all the officers and supervisors' names if possible. You want to get the names and numbers of any witnesses to the action. And again, if you are being arrested, you're not necessarily going to be able to talk to everybody. You might need to go back or post something on Facebook or post something on Indie Media or some other website that says, hey, were you down at the corner of X and Y on such and such a day? I need your help. In Portland, the rule for the police is they have to have their name on their outermost garment. So there's supposed to be a name tag right here. It's usually a hard to read bronze badge, but it's supposed to be on their outermost garment. They're also supposed to give you a business card if you ask for one. And as of, 3 years ago, they're supposed to give a business card out on every incident they have with people. We're not convinced they're doing it all the time. And that, if you want to sound really smart, you can say, I'd like your name and your DPSST number, not the badge number, the DPSST. Everybody say DPSST? DPSST. That's the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training. So they might freak out, oh, this person knows it's not a badge number, right? So finally, if you're the victim of police misconduct, you document injuries right away. You may wish to pursue any number of routes from filing a complaint with the Independent Police Review Division, which Joanne talked about a little bit, pursuing a lawsuit. Like I said, we usually do this training with lawyers. The lawyers will tell you, if it's your word against the cop, it's going to be kind of hard to file a lawsuit. If they called you a bad name, you can't really prove harm about that. So you're probably not going to be able to file a lawsuit. But if you have videotape, if you have injuries where you went to the hospital and you documented that, if you have witnesses that can corroborate your story, those are the kinds of cases that lawyers are likely to take on to try to hold people accountable. And unfortunately, we just heard this afternoon a couple of stories where the officer said, hey, go ahead and sue, it's not my money. Right? Which is, eventually, if the DOJ agreement goes into place, if an officer gets found out of policy by a jury in a civil trial, it's going to automatically be assumed to be a guilty finding in internal affairs unless something proves it otherwise. So there is some change that's happening. Those are your basic brains. Stay safe.
Last but certainly not least, Andy.
All right. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
My name's Andy.
And we're back to the slow.
That's fine. It's
You gotta let us know, okay?
It was good enough for me. I'm Andy Kulak, and I teach at Jefferson High School, where I've been proud to teach for the past 13 years. I teach 10th grade English, which used to be the grade level where state testing was done. That's been moved to the junior year, which is about part of the story about changing the rules in state testing, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. I also teach a senior inquiry class, which is a senior level class that combines English, government economics, and 15 PSU elective credits with the University Studies Department. I have some of my students here tonight, and I want to thank them for being here. It means a lot to me. So, Joanne had mentioned a glaring statistic that didn't make the newspaper. I know a place that makes the newspaper a lot of the times in a negative way, unfortunately. And part of what I want to talk about is social control and social construction working at Jefferson High School. There's a perception and there's a reality. Often when I talk about Jeff, I get in this defensive stance. And when I was preparing my notes and thinking, I wasn't asked to be here to defend Jefferson, but it's this stance that you take because a lot of what I hear from people is not what I experience when I'm in the building. And that's one of the reasons why I get in this place. So I'm not going to go into a big defensive piece, but I do want to talk about why it's important to defend. And then ultimately what I want to talk about is the school-to-prison pipeline. And I want to specify a little more closely from my experience and talk about the classroom-to-prison pipeline and my responsibility as a classroom teacher for my students, and primarily my students of color. If you don't know Jefferson, Jefferson is a majority-minority school. It's about 60% African-American. These are estimates. I don't know the exact figures with me today. 15% Hispanic, 15% white, 5% Asian Pacific Islander, 2% identifying as multiracial, and then less than 2% Native American. It's this social construction piece that is so dangerous to our students. I was teaching a summer school course, and a student of mine was an 8th grader, and he was opting not to go to Jefferson because of what he had heard about the school. And he had actually laughed when I said, where are you going to go to school next year? And so I'm not coming here. I'm not going to get shot. I'm not going to go to school with a bunch of gangbangers. And granted, he had never been to Jefferson, but this was the perception that he had come in with. As fate would have it, he didn't get to go to the school he thought he wanted to, and is currently at Jefferson and excelling and loves it. And I checked in with him before I came here tonight, and part of me was wondering if he was being, showing off a little bit in front of his friends and just being a little cheeky in the classroom, And he said, no, I was dead serious. Like, that's what I believe. There are elements of danger for students in all of our high schools, unfortunately. But he was checking himself in the sense that what he's finding in the Jefferson community, what he's finding at our school is a place where he's supported and cared for and excelling. So it was great to check back in with him. Unfortunately, we have a lot of students that do buy into that social construction, that Jefferson is not serious about education. And we have those high-stakes testing scores, the Oaks test scores, that seem to support that. There's also the perception that it's a dangerous place, and a place of criminal activity. When we look at the crime map in Portland, it's interesting to note that the highest incident of crime around a high school is actually Lincoln High School. But logic tells you that that's because of its location in downtown. But if you want to talk about the neighborhood where crime is happening, have that conversation. The reality of Jefferson is a place where for 13 years, I wake up and am excited to go to every day. It's a place of intense learning. Students that are curious and inquisitive and hardworking. And this is the daily reality. So the trouble of hearing the perception is exceptionally jarring. When what you experience on a daily basis, and when you leave at the end of the day, exhausted from a hard day's work, sometimes frustrated, that to me is part of the challenge of our work in school. I do want to say, too, that the state testing scores, I came in the second year after reconstitution, where everybody in school was fired, and they rehired everybody. So really a chaotic move when you're looking at the education of children. When I came in, the reading scores, we were passing the reading test at 26%. Right. Every year since then, that number has gone up incrementally. And last year, reading was tied to graduation. You don't get to graduate unless you pass the reading test. And all of our students who needed to pass that reading test did so, either on the Oaks reading assessment or through reading work samples. But no student was prevented graduation from that reading test, which is a remarkable. The high stakes only go up from there. So now we add reading and we add math to that graduation requirement. So the work gets much more intense. But I'm happy to work in a place where there are teachers and an administrative team that is willing and ready to do that work on behalf of our students, and a student body that has risen to the challenge, which is another wonderful thing. So I want to get back to the social construction and buying into it. So if a student comes in and buys into this idea that it's a place that's not serious about education, or that is a dangerous place, then there's an affect that they're going to have when they come in. And that's a challenge to dismantle. It's a challenge to break down. Once they experience the reality, things change. And that's where we get to do our best work. But students that don't buy in and get pushed out fall into what we've been hearing about from the other panelists. They fall into being not in school, the safe place where we're to protect them, but out into a place where they're being surveilled much more frequently, and are more likely to be stopped and harassed and checked. And from the stories that I hear from my students, that is their reality. Sorry, my notes are all over the place. I was jotting so many things down. The work that we do, I wanted to say a little bit about what that looks like in the classroom. So last year I was part of an action research team with some fellow teachers. And this comes from our work with the Pacific Education Group and Courageous Conversations About Race, which you may have read about in the Portland Tribune recently. Our work is I'm very proud of the work that we've done. I'm very proud to be on the team that I'm on. Last year, what I had noticed from the start of the year, I had a group of African American boys that had started the year sitting up straight, taking it all in, really engaged in what we were doing. And as the year progressed, I noted them starting to fade to the periphery of the room. My action research was the question of how do I not to get those boys just back plugged in, to be leaders in the classroom, to find their academic voices and their confidence back in the classroom again. I know that 10 minutes is a limited time and I don't want to take you through the whole process, but if we are going to do breakout sessions later, or if there's questions later, I'll tell you more about how that process works. but to know that I'm part of a team of teachers that are asking the questions on how to keep our students engaged and inside our classrooms and in our schools, that's the kind of professional development, the kind of work that I want to be a part of, and that I believe we are a part of at Jefferson. That school to prison or classroom to prison pipeline that occurs when students don't find a place in the classroom and are pushed out, and then are left to be caught up in the system that we see that is all too late, like 300 arrests and killings over the summer. In 1 month. So it's crucial that we keep our students in the place where they need to be, receiving the education that they're going to need to be successful in the world at large. I totally went off my notes because I was going off of something else, so bear with me for a second. So I guess the key components that in my action research that I was thinking about in terms of crafting the kinds of lessons that keep my students of color, my young men of color too, in the room. And I want to bring this up too because it was after the murder of Trayvon Martin where this became even more severe and more serious. And in my conversations with kids, it became more so when Dan was talking about knowing your rights on paper, you know, I had one student say like, yeah, I get it, I get that those are my rights, but there's no way. When there's 2 of them stopping me at night and they're asking me to do whatever, like that's the position I'm in by myself right there. And after Trayvon Martin was murdered and we talked about, here's somebody who is playing at or pretending to be the police and participating in this surveillance culture that's going on. And how much more real that becomes where it's not just a mass incarceration system, it's your life, where you fit a certain demographic that I'm watching for and looking to stop. I really hope we do hear from some voices today about stories that you have. I know that the most important part of my job is keeping kids in, and keeping kids engaged, and getting kids to the next level in their education. And I do take great pride in that. I think I'm at the end of my notes. So, sorry if that was a little bit short.
So would you join me once again in giving this panel a really big... What we want to do now is create a space for young people. If you have stories to share, we want you to be able to have that opportunity to do that now. Are there any young people that want to share any stories about encounters with the police? See any hands? Going once, twice? See him getting up, but he doesn't look like a young guy. Doesn't look that young. Well, okay, if there are no young people that want the floor, we will...
Right here.
Oh, right? I'm sorry. Hi.
My name is Waldo. I don't know if I just tell the story or...
If you would hold for just a sec, I want to acknowledge State Representative Lou Fredericks in the back of the room. Thank you for coming. Tell me your age, but you don't look like the demographic group that I was looking for. I was like thinking high school or college. Or, I wanted to give a space for that group first because the adults normally take up the space. And so if there are any young people that have stories that they want to share, now would be a great time for that.
My name's Cody.
Can you stand up, please, and project?
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't have my voice.
Yeah. My name's Cody. I definitely live in a suburban area, but I was out with some friends out in Oregon City, Clackamas area, and I was stopped by a police officer. Followed me actually for a couple of miles without turning his lights on. I believe that he was running my plates while he was following me because I could kind of see him tapping away on his computer. After a while, he actually flipped his lights on and pulled me over. He came up to the window and he actually didn't say anything to me. I'm just kind of like a really outspoken person, and so I actually just kind of started talking to him and was like, hey, how you doing, officer? And was like being nice with him. And he didn't do anything. He just kind of looked in my car and saw that I was with some friends of mine. And I guess he just thought I was like being really suspicious, and he was actually with another officer of his who at one point got out of the car, waved him, and was like, "Hey, let's just go," and he just left. Like, he just pulled me over because I looked suspicious.
And probably how many people in your car?
There was me and two other of my friends.
And were any of the people of color?
No, it was just me and two girls, and they just pulled me over. And yeah, they just followed me for like a couple miles, and he didn't say anything to me about like, "Oh, you're doing this," or I thought you were speeding, or I thought you run that red light, or anything. He just followed me for like 2 miles.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because that is a tactic that's used, and because guess what? If there's a police car behind you, no matter who you are, you start sweating, you start getting on the line, and so if they're following you, they can always find a reason to pull you over. And so it's natural for people to be uncomfortable when that happens. Okay, sir, unless we've got another guest now.
Okay, so I'm Angela Jefferson. I'm a senior at Jefferson High School. So my story's kind of short, but I was leaving from my SAT one day, and I was in the car with my mom, and the police officer was in the turning lane, and we were in the middle lane, and this young black male was in the other lane beside us, and the police officer's light turned green. He stayed there, and he was just looking at the black young male, and then the black young male's light turned green. He went, and the police officer cut through traffic just to go pull him over.
Wow.
And it was crazy because me and my mom and my stepmom, we went straight, but then we wondered what happened. So then my stepmom, she had us drive down the street because we didn't want to get pulled over. We're trying to see what happened. So we went back and she went to check on him. And then I guess he just pulled him over basically because he's black. He didn't even have a reason.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Any youth first?
My name's Oliver. I'm from New York. And one time, when I was 17 years old.
Can you project just a little bit more? Thank you.
When I was 17 years old or so, I was basically walking home with a couple of my friends from a party. And we were just walking back to our car, and this was in a rural area. And I think that also police target youth of all creeds these days. And so myself and two other white folks were walking down the street, and we see some lights go on. And my friends just instantly started running because that's the conception. It's like, oh, we're walking at night, and these cops are going to be busting our ass about something. So we all start running. And I didn't even want to, but my friends are already running. I'm not going to be the one running. So I start running, and we jump into the car, and I'm thinking this is so useless because the cops are already 75 feet away driving towards us, and now he's got his lights on. My friend, my good friend Sam, he never ever interacted with a police officer in his life. He was 22 at the time, so it was pretty crazy. But so we're driving away, and he's thinking that somehow we're going to get away from this cop. Then he's turned on the lights, we got to pull over. So we pull over, and then we realized that my friend Sam had a small amount of cannabis on him. And then that's when he just started freaking out. He's, I talked about the most epitome of fear. He's like, yo man, this cop's going to beat the shit out of us when we leave on the side of the road. And I've interacted with cops a lot before, but I wasn't really thinking like that. But then once he started talking like that, then I was having all these illusions like, this cop, what's he gonna do? There's no one around. We're in the woods. It's really weird that the cop is even there.
Right.
And so the cop comes over to the car, and he's got his hand on his gun, and puts the light in the car, and he's like, everybody put your hands out in front of you. And we all put our hands out in front of us, and he's like, oh, what are all your names? License, registration, all this stuff. He's sitting us with all this stuff. And then he starts asking us all for our addresses. He starts asking us for what we were doing back there. And so my good friend James, the other guy, he's like, we don't have to tell you this stuff. And that's when the cop's like, oh yeah, you want to be like that? Well, I'm going to call for backup. And then he walks away. And I'm like, what? This is bullshit. And then my friend Sam, who's never ever interacted with the cop, is basically like He's like, yo, you're not this cool. Back up. You know what's going to happen to us? And so the tensions are high. The cop's in his car for half an hour. We're sitting there in the car just thinking like all the messed up stuff this cop's going to do to us. And then he's like, get your friend on the line because we think you were out robbing houses because your friend had a hood on. And so we're like, what? There's nothing in the car. He's like, are you consent saying we can search the car? And my friend Sam knew well enough to say, no, I don't consent to a search. The cop says, all right, well, we're going to wait for backup. Waits for another 20 minutes. He comes back and says, you're free to go. So, but what I wanted to say was that 1 week later, my friend Sam was incarcerated for a dirty cannabis pipe. This dude now he has a master's in music, but he was arrested a week later after never having dealt with a cop. But that's just my story. The cops try to intimidate you, freak you out.
So it's an interesting story because it sounds like they were like tracking him after that interaction on the road.
Yeah, for sure. And it was in a town not too far by. So.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. Sir, I want to come back to you because we appear to be back to your demographic group again. I want to get him first and then I'll come right back to you two gentlemen. Go ahead, sir.
I kind of a little bit related to the Mr. Anderson, right?
Handleman?
No, the teacher for that?
Andy Kulak.
Andy Kulak. I kind of relate to the three students that kind of not going to school. They're kind of outside. Well, I was kind of one of those kids. I didn't. I had a friend of mine come to school. He was a drug dealer, but he would come to school and he was like, "Oh, man, I don't know about all this school stuff." But if you really want to make it, this is where you make it. He came out of the pocket with a big old wall like that of money. Like, this is where it's at, Waldo. I don't know about all this school stuff. You know, I just come to school because, you know, I'm so drugs in school and stuff. I'm like, oh, you know.
So is that the story you want to share with us?
That was kind of the story that I kind of like, because I had ventured out. I didn't go back to school. Now that I moved over here, I got to go back to school. I got to do all that kind of stuff. I'm a former gang man, drug dealer, you know, all that kind of stuff. I kind of relate to everything that you guys talk about up here now. So that's kind of like one story.
Well, let me ask you this question though, sir, before you sit down. So as someone who's formerly been involved in criminal behavior, do you feel comfortable walking the street? Did the police target you, or are you being hassled?
Since I moved here,
yes.
I don't get hassled by the cops. I get hassled more by the Max.
That's going to be another battle. Sir?
My name is Clifton. I attend school here at PCC. I have actually two incidences from this year. One involving FBI, which is probably a little bit outside of our main discussion, and one where I was more of a witness during protest actions. Which one do you want to hear?
Let's hear you being a witness at a protest action.
Okay, so I took part in an unregulated May Day march. You know, in other words,
unpermitted.
Unpermitted. Yeah, in other words, a riot, according to the police. But in other words, we didn't pay the city police protection. So we took part in this march. We all gathered at the waterfront, and then we went on our way. Of course, there was extreme heavy police presence, and they had pretty much had the bullhorn van. They had, of course, choppers in the air, the bumblebee cops on their bikes, motorcycle cops, horseback, you know, as well as many patrols. And so basically it was a group of, I would say, estimate, you know, between 200 and 300, maybe slightly more than that of us. And we were at least matched by police, person for person. And things got very much hectic right away. And of course, pretty much all the violence that took part in that day, a number of arrests were made, you know, but most of the violence, if not all of it, you know, happened on the part of the cops. And that's the thing, you know, despite what you might hear about so-called black bloc or people who might hijack, protests or whatnot, most of the time there's violence at demonstrations. It's because police cause violence. And I watched myself, people being yanked off their bikes, people being rammed, on their bikes by other bike officers, people being basically either pushed onto the sidewalk or yanked off of the sidewalk and just cornered and thrown to the ground. I watched this happen to guys my size, to younger women who were half my size, etc. And lots of pepper spray was used, and there was basically an overwhelming force of cops who were just looking for trouble. The fact of the matter is, if there had been like a modest police presence, then you wouldn't have had anything at all. There wouldn't have been much news to tell that day. So, that's what I witnessed. I took like many photos. Many other people have as well. So all of this stuff is easy to find online. And I'm just saying, anytime you take part in any kind of demonstration, then the police will come out in overwhelming full force because, of course, they have a large budget. You just said so yourself, they're getting even more money, so they're going to do something with that.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. So now, we'll still take stories, but we'll open it up to questions from anyone. And I think the gentleman beside you had his hand up, and the lady behind him had her hand up. So we'll start with you, sir. And could you project, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Vince Singer. I'm also a senior at Jefferson High School. Mine's not necessarily a specific incident, but it's an observation that would specifically relate to football games at Jefferson High School. And this is kind of addressed in the panel as well, open to some of the question and a statement, is the use of funds and how symbols at a Jefferson football game. From my observations, there are about 7 to 8 police officers surrounding the entrance of the gate and all around the school. And somewhat of a question, I just want to address what those power dynamics symbolize within the school, and certain fear and resentment towards the police force. For like one incident, I was in front of, you walk down the side of the block, it's the commercial side if anyone's familiar, near the library. You walk by and they flash their lights on all the students that walk past that perimeter, of the gate between.
Right.
And I felt, personally being in there, you feel very singled out and ostracized by that light, and you feel like you're doing something wrong automatically by being just in that area. And I just want to, if anyone can elaborate during questions of how that perpetuates certain beliefs and tendencies about the police force, and what students and other community members around the community are doing wrong by participating just at Jefferson High School, and how sometimes that when there is, what Mr. Kulak, he's my teacher, I address him that way, says that you have higher crime rates around schools of Lincoln and Wilson, why those police officers aren't there at the time. If they're protecting the crime and they're public servants, why is there double the amount most of the time needed for police officers to watch? And that's every day. There's always at least a couple police officers sitting inside their car watching all students walk by. And I just, I believe that, as I said before, perpetuates a lot of power dynamic beliefs and fear and paranoia of the police officers watching these young students. And they feel like when they're at school, what they're doing right, and those police officers that are watching them, they have the belief that there's something wrong with that. There should be, people have the belief that the police are there, there's something wrong, and there's something illegal or illegitimate going on. And with students having police officers at school, what idea and belief does that promote about the importance and the legitimacy of school?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Okay. If you got a response?
What's that? Well, I was just going to say that there's a thing called the continuum of force that the police used to believe, and apparently they're dismantling it, where the first level of force of a police officer is mere presence. And so they know, and they're trained, that just by being there with their badge and their gun and their pepper spray and their taser, that they are you know, at least intimidating you or exerting some kind of force on you. So being there at Jefferson, they think they're protecting the community. So if you talk to the individual officer, they'll probably say, oh, well, we're protecting the community because there's been a lot of problems here. The individual officers. But institutionally, right, what that projects is this trying to control the community, right? And I think that the officers don't understand that when you say there's institutional racism, they think you're calling them as an individual a racist and they shut down. But there's some movement towards that. There's actually going to be a training that's going to start with the supervisors and move its way down about institutional racism. It'll be starting sometime later this month. So we'll see if that changes the culture, see if it changes the presence of Jefferson, but I'm hoping that it will.
Well, and actually, I appreciate that, Dan. And the other thing is that I've heard that after Jefferson games, the gang officers come out, right, with their little yellow coats that they come out, and they really do an excellent job of intimidating students and other folks who've come to the game to try to force people to get out of the neighborhood as soon as possible. I don't know why they're out there. And having a conversation with the lieutenant that works in this area, he says, oh, well, it's, you know, we send all those police officers out there to keep people safe after the games. But it's like, so what you do is you send your youngest, most rookie cops, fresh out of the academy, who have no relationships in this community, and you tell them to come out at the end of the basketball game or the football game and make sure people behave. And what that looks like, what that feels like is intimidation. Because their whole purpose for being there is to intimidate people to do something different. So the lady behind you had a question or statement?
Yeah, I have a story.
Please project.
Yeah. My name's Erica, and a couple years ago when I was about 19 or 20, I decided that I wanted to take my boyfriend, who's half white, half African-American, to go see my school, because he had never seen it, and it's out in Beaverton, and my high school. And they were doing construction, and we didn't realize that if you got too close to the construction site, it set off like an alarm at the police department. Well, they came, and he apparently had a warrant out for his arrest for missing a court date or something, which I later found out he never got a court date from the police officer, so it was really confusing. But they had asked him for his ID and all this information, and all they asked me for was my name. They asked if I had ID, which I did in my car, but they never had me get it and show them, so they just believed who I was. And that was the first time I had ever witnessed like racial inequality with like police. And they weren't like rude or anything, but it bothered me, and it still to this day bothers me that they didn't ask to look at my ID, because now that I know that I was driving, they're supposed to like look at all that information, even though, and they knew I had a car. Like I told them, I was like, it's in my car, but they still didn't look. And it bothered me, and apparently, I don't know if it's true, but I was told that they weren't allowed to take him to jail since they didn't ask for all my information as well. So it was really frustrating.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yes, sir.
My name's Steve. I actually have a similar story. I was with my partner, and we were walking back late at night from dinner and stuff, and we walked through a park, and we stopped in the park for a little bit, swung its wings. It was after midnight. We were walking back out. And Unthink Park, yeah, up in the Northeast Park. And as we were walking back out, there was a group of police, probably 5 or 6 police, who had stopped 2 teenage girls. They were African American girls, and they were telling them that they're not allowed in the park. It's after midnight, the park's closed, and stuff like that. We started kind of like walking across the street, and we were walking away, and we heard one of them yelling, "What about them? What about them? You know, they're in the park too. Are you gonna stop them?" And they weren't. But we stopped, and we waited on the side of the road for a little bit, and finally we just went up and started talking. Well, we didn't really talk to the cops. We just went back over there, because they finally said, "Okay, yeah, we got to stop them too." Never asked us for ID, never followed anything. But what was funny was that one of the cops kept us. The rest of the cops took off after they let the girls go. It wasn't really anything they were doing, but harassing them. But the one cop who kept us there for a while, we hardly said maybe 10 words to him the whole time, but he went on for probably 20 minutes about how this wasn't racist and there wasn't anything wrong with it, that they just need to look out for the community and make sure that everything's, and it was just mind-blowing, you know. And it was obvious that he was really embarrassed and that knew what he was doing looked real bad. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. We appreciate that. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Please stand so you can project. I'm sorry I don't have a mic.
So my name is Ellie. I'm a former PCC student, current PSU student. I grew up in the neighborhood. I grew up off 25th in Alberta, and I'm 32 now. So about 20 years ago, I watched a black neighbor, 16-year-old boy, get beaten by police for bouncing a basketball into a neighbor's car accidentally. I don't know, I guess like that was kind of the beginning of like my understanding of police and race in Portland. And I guess like I just want to like be clear that my experiences with police are that I don't have any. I'm a white woman. I don't get harassed by police. I don't get followed, even when sometimes I should. And that I guess the other thing that I wanted to bring up, and maybe for generation of discussion, is that policing is not meant to prevent crime, right? It's meant to punish or to enforce punishments for crimes that are being committed, or at least that's the idea. So it's not about prevention. So police, when they're like, I'm here to, keep you safe, that's not actually their role. That's not their role ever. Their role is to, enforce punishments after crimes happen.
Well, I just want to correct you just a little bit because actually it's not the police role to enforce punishment. That's why we have a judiciary, right? And so the courts get to decide whether you're guilty. The police are only if they think you committed a crime. If it's a ticket, a crime, then they give you a ticket, you show up at a court, right? If it's a crime where they get to arrest you, then there's a judge, and that's the whole process with the district attorney to figure out what the charges are. So I think, though, that we do have it. And in fact, in the investigation, they talked about some police officers who think that their job is just to put people in jail. I'm a police officer, my job is to put people in jail, right? And so that's the challenge that we have to deal with. I think we don't even talk about community policing anymore, except every once in a while, whoever the police chief is comes out with a new community policing 10-year plan that nobody else has seen other than whoever the police chief is at the time. Okay, let's see, lots of hands. I'll take you, sir, and I'll just work my way back.
My name is David. This is a question for the first speaker. I really appreciate you providing that background about Attica. It used to be a time in this country when we had, prison, political prisoners. And I think that nowadays we just have prisoners, right? And so we have this huge expansion of the prison industrial complex. And nobody considers it somehow political. They just consider it like law enforcement. I kind of disagree with what she just said about it's not the police's job to enforce, the law. It is. The more police you hire, the more people they arrest. We've expanded the police and the prison system, quantum. And so what would we expect? And, you talk about, the genocidal nature of the country. We know that that's how it began. So I think what you spoke about, Michelle Alexander's books, not anything new. We know it's happening. There's no critical thought about why it's happening. There's no critical resistance. And then the rest of the world looks at us and they wonder, are we all crazy? Are we all living in a crazy house in the world? And we might be. So I appreciate you trying to bring some sanity to this conversation.
Do you have any comments you want to make?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think we might be. I think that, yeah, I mean, we are, right? That's the thing. But we can't actually, I mean, we can see it in this room, but, crazy people are crazy.
Well, we'll see.
So, but I mean, the thing is, we actually do have political prisoners. But I think that, I think part of the criminalization of, and we actually still have political prisoners that have been in prison for 40 years since the time when they were first put in prison, right? So, since the movement was criminalized. And I think the criminalization of civil rights and black power and brown power and red power in particular had such a massive effect to depoliticize any kind of economic and social justice struggles that we can't actually recognize political prisoners when we see them. To the point where one can make the argument, wait, so are all prisoners political prisoners? And that's actually, I'm not saying we should make the argument, but I'm saying that's actually a legitimate question to be asking today.
There are a couple of people in the Pacific Northwest who refuse to testify in grand jury, and they're sitting in jail right now. Grand jury about breaking some windows in Seattle.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to bring into the discussion, I know that a lot of this happens in Portland, but I grew up in a small town outside of Salem. And it actually, for a while, I don't know that it's still there. It was where the police academy was located. So I don't know how many of these police were trained there in this around the state.
All of them start there.
Yeah. So I'm half black and half white, and my parents had met at the college in that town, so they lived there and raised me there. And my family was constantly harassed. When we'd have family barbecues, we'd have the county sheriff circling our block. So it was really extreme, and just growing up there, constantly being harassed by the police, especially like when my brothers and I reached around high school age, constantly being stopped and getting in trouble. My brother was charged because he lit a match and threw it on the ground for arson or something like that. And then later on, having people that were African American coming into town to visit me and being stopped. For instance, my husband was right here, but I lived there for about a year when we first dated, and he was stopped like 6 times, never won a ticket. And anybody who goes up to the college there is harassed constantly. So, I think it's definitely happening here, but I just would like to bring that to the conversation. Just imagine how much is going on in some of these other smaller rural areas and how extreme it is.
Oh, yeah. That's a great point. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Randy, and I wanted to see if the panel would respond to a theme that's in Alexander's book, which is that the police aren't the source of the oppression, they're a tool of the oppression. And that police departments often force police officers to engage in these types of behavior, including having a quota for arrest, or in places like New York, stop and frisk laws, where if the police officer doesn't participate in this, what seems to be very biased behavior, they themselves are punished. Right? They're demoted or they're moved around. Now, I just want to get the take on the panel about how much you think that is a part of the institutional culture of the police in Portland. Is it something that's just done? Is this just sort of beat up on the police department night, or is it more about the top-down model and the pressures to go where, quote-unquote, the criminals are, which apparently is on Killingsworth, right? Is there an institutional element to this that we should be looking at as well as telling these important stories?
Right. No, I think you raise a really important question, and who would like to take the first shot at it?
Well, I think that you're not only, it's not a quota system by the Portland Police Bureau necessarily. We're talking about institutions. I would point to institutions like the Portland Business Alliance, right, which cleaned out, they're the ones that wanted the parks downtown cleaned out for Occupy Portland. And whoever, the PCC management helped participate in the Killingsworth.
Right, that's right, it was Killingsworth.
So there are these institutions that want that have economic interests. So, this is, when you say that the tools of the economic interests. And, I don't think the police bureau, if it stood by itself, I don't think that necessarily they'd be out continuing the work of slave catchers of the 1800s, but that they're part of a larger system that needs them to protect the people who have the money from the people who don't have the money, right?
And one of the things I would add to that, Randy, is that for me, my frustration lies in the fact that even till this day, even after having the Department of Justice come in, do this thorough investigation, come out with their findings, Portland Police has still not admitted that there's a problem with Portland police officers. And so you cannot fix a problem that you have not acknowledged exists. And so what you hear from me, I know, I can say, is my frustration. Because for me, I want a police department that treats kids in Northeast the same way they treat kids in the Southwest Hills, right? And I don't want there to be any difference in how policing happens in Northeast and in the Southwest Hills. And so that's why I get frustrated, because if the police chief is on the news saying, it's not us, it's the mental health system, and then because they know most of the general public have not read the investigation, right? So you cannot read the investigation and go, we have no problems with Portland Police. And so there are fundamental problems in the culture and the structure of how they operate. And then, as we've heard tonight, based on who you are and whether or not you're perceived to have power, determines how the police respond to you in the local community. And so I'm going to head over in this section. Now, I'll come back to you, sir, but these people have been patiently waiting for me, but I'll come back to you. Yes, actually, you've already spoken, so I'm not going to go to you, but I'll go to you now. Hi.
So I grew up in Los Angeles in Southern California, and when I lived in Los Angeles, my father, he's from El Salvador, and whenever we would go out in the streets, the police would follow us, and when I was a young girl, and I think I was around 14 years old, I was in a truck with a couple of my friends that are Latino. And I'm very light-skinned. I get this question a lot. What are you? And so we were really young, and we had beer in the back of the truck, and we had one person, and it was me, that wasn't supposed to be in the truck without a seatbelt and everything like that. And what had happened is that they had asked everyone for their phone numbers, their parents' phone numbers, and a really similar thing where they didn't even talk to me. I was at the way end of the line, and and they just ended up saying, someone needs to take her home. And I actually got a really nice ride back to my house from the police officer. And so what I was wondering, though, about, because I have read the new Jim Cro, and it said earlier, the police are a tool, but is there any way that we can reform the justice system, like the prosecutors, the attorneys, the public defenders, felony laws? Like, is there any way to change that? Because even President Obama just changed, like, crack. Like, what was it, like 1 to 100 or something like that? He just recently lowered that. Now, is there any way to reform that on a bigger level than just the Portland police?
You raised an excellent question, and thank you for yes, there are organizations that are working on those kind of changes now. Like, for example, there's an organization called the Partnership for Safety and Justice that primarily works on prison reform issues, sentencing reform kind of issues, and they're local, and they've been around for a little while. I'd say the AMA Coalition has been focused on the Portland Police Bureau, but we also understand that we have to change state law. And so we've been working in partnership with folks like Representative Lou Fredericks to institute legislation coming up in the 2013 legislative session. One is to change the use of force law, because currently every police officer knows the only phrase they have to utter is, I was in fear of my life, or I was in the fear of someone else's life, and they can kill somebody with no accountability whatsoever, right? And we need to change that at the state level so that the law says, what would a reasonable person do? Would a reasonable person be scared of a naked guy in his own apartment, in his house, right? So we have to change that. The other thing is we cannot have the prosecutors that depend on the police officers investigating whether the police did wrongdoing. We need an independent prosecutor that will review police actions and determine whether or not they should be prosecuted. And third, we need to make sure that we do not have a stand your ground law in Oregon. Because when I checked, I I found out that the law is kind of ambiguous in Oregon. So it depends on who's reading it and how they read it and how they interpret it, whether or not we have a stand your ground. So those are 3 legislative changes. And what I can say, at Portland Copwatch, they've been doing it for 27 years. They've been watching the cops. They've been reporting on their activities. So I would suggest getting involved in groups who are already working on the piece you want to work on. Okay? And yes, sir.
I was just thinking what this young gentleman said right here about the posting that be at the different high schools.
Are you standing up?
Could you stand up and project?
Oh, you can't hear me sitting down? Okay. Okay. All right. No, I was thinking about what the gentleman said here about the officers at Jefferson High School, because my wife and I, we would go see our son play, football, and we would see, all the officers there. And when we went out to Milwaukee to see our son play football, there was no officers nowhere. Now, I used to tell my wife, I said, now, what if it was all black officers, or what if it was all Hispanic officers at an all-white school? What would be the mindset of the people out there then? If it was out there just one night, if it was out there just one night, you wouldn't see that the next game. I don't believe you would, but I think that it's an extreme to have it, because it's almost like you are anticipating something to happen when people just out just to have a good night, just to enjoy it. But it's like you anticipate. And also, I want to have a question for him, Anderson. Okay. Anyway, why Jefferson High School? I mean, I know it's I don't know if it was your calling or what, but the perception. Did you have a perception when you came to Jefferson? 13 years ago. What was your perception? Like you said, the young kid that had a perception he didn't want to come to Jeff because he might get shot. But after he came, it was a whole different, a whole different view. And so I just want to know, what was your perception before you came to Jefferson? Did you have a perception in your mind about the school before you came?
No, I mean, I moved here from Michigan by way of Chicago. That's where I'm from. And I didn't have a teaching job here. I had an interview, so it was open. And when I interviewed at Jefferson, that's where I was hired. What I was told before going there were all these other stories and warnings, and you don't want to work there like that. For me, my passion as an educator, when I looked at the achievement gap, but what Gloria Ladson-Billing calls the educational debt, it's what's owed in this big gap you have between white students and students of color on these high-performance, high-stakes tests. So the debt that's owed to close that, that's the kind of work that I want to do as an educator. I want to see that equity is brought to all of our schools. And so for me, why I stay at Jefferson, why I continue to do that work, is because that work's not done. I do want to say one more thing since I have the floor.
You almost lost it. Just
I got this plug. But first, too, I just want to echo, if you haven't been to a Jefferson football or basketball game or any of our events, please come, because they are glorious events and they're a lot of fun regardless of what kind of police detail you might see outside of there. And we're having our Black Student Union is having a panel much like this one, but with student voice, and around the new Jim Cro. And if you signed up on the email list back there, I'll make sure I send word through this network. And it'd be great to have some familiar faces in the audience to support our students as they share their voices in regards to Michelle Alexander's work. So,
yes, ma'am. I'm going to come back to you, I promise. So you can save your hand. You're going to be tired. Yeah, save it. I'll come back, I promise. Yes,
my name is Francis.
Francis, could you stand up and
I don't talk very loud, but I've been involved in our community for a long time, and my family members and my sons have all been profiled more than once, many times. My young son, who is now 27, between the ages of 10 years old and 15 years old, was stopped on an average of 3 times within a 5-block radius of his home, the only neighborhood he's ever lived in. We have friends of my sons who have been murdered by the police. Her book, Michelle Alexander's book, was joy to me because she did, as you said, put it all into a way where we could see that the genocide is happening. and it's happening every day. And I have letters here my mother had to read because her husband, who is in the Snake River Correctional Institution, and who was just denied parole again, has a letter that I want to give to you, sir, and a copy to you, Joanne, about his situation.
All right.
And she talks a lot in the book about our country's denial, the denial of this caste system, what we're doing to people coming out of prison who have nothing, and who now can't even rely on their families because their families will be evicted if they allow this felon to live in their home. It is genocide. And I want to know what we can do to bring that to the forefront to where it is recognized as what it is. And quit hiding and pretending like it doesn't exist. The gentrification that took place in Northeast Portland was all a result of these moneyed people wanting to renovate and revitalize the community at the expense of our young children. The traps that were laid for them are nefarious, they're wrong, it's disgusting, but it continues. And those young people now living in that system as collateral for the system. It's an industry. It's an industry. And anyway, I want to give you guys this.
Thank you, Francis. You can come up and drop those off if you'd like to. Right there's this young lady with the
My name is Vanessa, and my story happened about 7 years ago. I was pregnant with my son, and me and the father, who happened to be Caucasian, very clean-cut looking gentleman. We were driving around town in the evening time. It was pretty late, and my stomach started to cramp. So we pulled over on the side of the street, and we happened to pull over next to a park. And he was rubbing my stomach, and we were just talking, and the police showed up. And they put their lights in the car to see who was in the car. Well, they drove by, and when they put their lights on, and they saw who was in the car, and they stopped. And I'm thinking, like, what are we, I'm thinking, like, why would they stop as we're parked when we're driving? And so they get out, and they look inside the car, and they see Caucasian male and African-American female. And so they start asking for ID from me. And then they ask ID from him. And they're asking us, what are we doing there? Like it was like they were insinuating it was a prostitution situation. And then he pointed out my stomach, which was clearly enlarged. And I was pregnant with this child, and then we were just, taking, time out for that. And so they asked, they asked him for driver's license, which was suspended. He was driving, his license was suspended. They asked him for insurance, asked for registration, he couldn't find it in the glove compartment. I'm thinking, dang, we're going to jail. Then they asked him for insurance. He says, oh, I don't have insurance, it's to my parents. And I'm thinking, okay, this is it, we're done. We're walking home, or I'm walking home. And the officer said, you know what, just next time, just be careful, and just don't park next to a park, and left. And I'm sitting there when the officer leaves, my at the time boyfriend was just like, relief. And I'm sitting there just frustrated, just angry, like this did not just happen. If this were a black man, we would, he would have been in jail, car impounded. I probably would have been in jail with them. Right, yeah. They just let all those suspended license, no insurance, no registration. They let all that slide under the rug.
So thank you so much for sharing that story. I so know that story is true because what we know is over the last 8 years, Portland police have been collecting traffic and pedestrian stop data. And what we know from their own data is that African Americans are twice as likely to be stopped. What we know is that they're twice as likely to be searched, and half as likely to have any drugs, paraphernalia, or weapons on them. If you get to the white population, they're less likely to be stopped, less likely to be searched, but if by chance they actually happen to be stopped, and if by chance they happen to be searched, they are more likely to have guns, drugs, and other paraphernalia on their body. So Portland Police Bureau's own data shows us that. I have a friend, Jamie Partridge, that used to tell the story about he always drives beater cars. And he says he never gets stopped until his African-American friends are in his automobile. And so he tells that story quite a bit. So that is so real. It is absolutely so real. We are just about out of time. And I want to take a moment to give the panel an opportunity to say, how do we fix this? I mean, I think we can all agree that we have a problem here in Portland, right? And so one of my recommendations for the fix is I have a sign-up sheet. So if there are people in the audience that want to hear about police accountability efforts, that want to be involved in actually helping us get a truly independent police reform system in place, please sign up here, and I will make sure to keep you connected when activities are taking place. And I will turn it over to Anoop.
Sure. So I get this question a lot as a teacher, and it's always a very difficult question to answer because on one hand there are a lot of real things that you can do, but it seems like an overwhelming problem. So I think there's a few things that I would stress. One, I think that it's kind of we tend to assume that one of the best ways to make change is to be able to change people's minds about things, right? And I think that's very much true. And in many ways, that's maybe the first step to begin to attempt to do that. And I think that that's what we're doing here, and that's what I think most of us try to do in our daily lives. But I also want to stress that it can never actually stop there because that doesn't ever do anything on its own, and it's still I think it's still suspect that one can change someone's mind who is able to profit off of a system that's already kind of organized and it makes things so comfortable for them, right? So I like to think about this in terms of being able to engage power with people that are willing to work with you. You're always going to have much more success working with people who are affected on a day-to-day basis by these problems because they're the ones that have the most at stake in making something happen. And so I think of that in terms of what would it mean to make your communities into something where you are consciously thinking about how to engage power, how to strategize on the ground. Another thing is decriminalization of drugs is one of the most important things. Obviously, we had a really kind of a good day on Tuesday for that, and long way to go, right? I mean, clearly, but it's something that we all need to kind of focus on, I think. And then the last thing, one of my old teachers, she likes to say, I remember this a lot, I tell my students a lot, that difference, and reform has a bad rap for obvious reasons, because prison reform, police reform tends to just make prison and police stronger, right? So what she likes to say is that the difference between abolition and reform is not means but purpose. So, I mean, I don't even need to explain it. It's just worth thinking about.
Thank you. Both got 1 minute apiece.
Well, I think that we have to continue to struggle. I mean, it's always described by Dr. Bethel, the AMA Coalition, as a marathon, not a sprint. But these little cards, you can teach other people what their rights are. Spread the word. There's a handful of us supporting Copwatch. We've done hundreds of seminars, but there's hundreds of thousands of people that need to know what's going on. And if you have the time, patience, and energy, and I think patience might be the key word there, I would show up. Show up at City Council when they're talking about police issues and tell your stories. They need to hear it straight from you. They hear it from us all the time. They don't believe us because they don't see you in person. And learn how the system works so that when you're criticizing the system, that you can say, I went to this meeting and this is how they messed up. Last night the Citizen Review Committee allowed a police officer who dragged a woman out of her house in an illegal arrest to get off and not be held accountable for the excessive force that he used. And I can explain to you for hours how that happened, but you have to see it with your eyes, and then you can complain how the system really works and how it can change.
Just to echo the point of criticizing, so I mean, just to put it plain, you need to love your demos. That's number one. When people want to criticize our school, I need you to ask them to interrupt and ask them if they've been there lately. And if they haven't, you need to interrupt the perpetuation of that myth because it's damaging to the reality and it does damage, emotional, psychological damage to our kids who we need to keep in school. The other thing I would ask you to question is the influx and the push for more high-stakes testing, which is what we don't need. We need more student-centered curriculum in the classroom.
And then for me, I guess the last word would be is to get involved in an organization that's working on the piece that you want to work on. And if one doesn't exist, you may actually have to start one. Because quite frankly, I'm thinking about starting a Constitutional Rights Center because it's clear that we don't know our constitutional rights and the police don't know our constitutional rights. And so we got to make sure that we all know our rights so that we can protect them. I want to thank you all for being here. I want you to know that there are books in the back on both Michelle Alexander and some other books that are really good reading on this topic. There are also some organizations outside that have some sign-up sheets for other work that's going to be taking place.